Hello gamers, my name is Spark, and today I'm going to show you an awesome one-of-a-kind tool that you can use at your D&D or other TTRPG table. In this video I'm going to show you a nuanced interactions for copulation experiences generator. This is a great tool for GMs who have players who like to visit establishments of horizontal entertainment. My wife and I specifically built this generator in mind for duets where you have a single player and a DM as boyfriend and girlfriend or as husband-wife or something like that, where there might be increased opportunities for the PC to be engaged in certain adult activities. I built this generator specific to D&D 5e, but with just a little bit of tweaking, it can work for practically any TTRPG. Here's how this video is going to go. For starters, I'm going to show you the basics of how this tool works and how you can utilize it at your table. Then I'm going to show you what's happening behind the scenes to make the generator work and how you can customize it to better fit your campaign. What we're looking at here is we have a bunch of settings right here in this section, and then we have a results section right here. Let's start off by looking at the settings, and then we'll generate a result to get an idea of what type of results we can expect. Over here on the left, you are going to determine how many characters are involved in this experience. How many player characters are there? You can set between 1 and 10, and what their various genders are. If you have multiple male and multiple female, you would select both. How many NPCs are involved in this experience? You can go all the way up to 100. And what are their primary genders? And then you can determine how long the encounter is. You can set between 1 and 60 minutes or hours. All of these settings will impact other results, which is why they're here. And I'll show you what impacts these will have here in just a minute. Next, we have boons and penalties, and this is a checkbox system or a custom system. Let me show you the checkbox system. If you click random, then all of these checkboxes turn on. You'll notice before that they were grayed out like this, but if you set it to random, they turn back on. And basically what this is saying is, do you want boons and penalties included? And what this really pertains to is if your PCs are engaged in a copulation experience, what is the likelihood of there being boons or penalties for that experience? Mild, moderate, or intense boons and penalties, or none whatsoever. So this checkbox system allows you to determine what level of boons and penalties might be possible. So if you only wanted mild boons and penalties, then you would just select mild only, and now those will be the only results that are generated. But if you click this to custom, then this shuts off and it doesn't use the checkbox system at all. You can edit these and that doesn't matter. The results are going to be dependent upon an odds table that I'm going to show you in the second half of this video when we get into customization. If you don't want there to ever be any boons or penalties, you can either select random and then leave none checked, or you can straight up just click off, and that shuts the whole system of boons and penalties off. If you look down here in the results section, you can see that there is a section for boon on success and penalty on failure. We will talk about that more in a minute. Now, this little setting underneath it where it says force BP balance, BP stands for boons and penalties, and there is a little black triangle right there in that corner. If you hover your mouse over that, you will get a little drop-down menu that describes to you what this setting does. Simply put, if this is set to yes, then whatever result we get with the boon, we will also get with the penalty. What that means is if we have a mild boon that gets generated, then it will generate a mild penalty. If yes is set, it will generate mild boon and mild penalty, or moderate boon and moderate penalty. In other words, it's going to be balanced. Whatever happens on one side happens on the other. If you set this to no, then it's possible that the boon received will be mild and the penalty received will be intense, or vice versa, or the boon might be none, but the penalty is moderate. So it allows for imbalance between these two sections. So that's what that drop-down menu does. And if this isn't making any sense quite yet, don't worry, I will explain all of this when we're looking at some results. This next section has to do with pregnancy. Now, if you don't want there to ever be any possibility of pregnancy in the results here, then you can just set this to off and leave it off. But if you want pregnancy to be possible, you can select possible. All of this will turn on, as it were, and then you get to determine, was protection in use during this experience? No protection, arcane protection, alchemical protection or normal protection. Normal being something like a condom or something that's non-arcane and non-alchemical, but nevertheless decreases the likelihood of pregnancy. Now underneath that you have conception odds, and notice that there's another pop-up box here that explains what's going on. But this basically determines what is the percentage likelihood of pregnancy when no protection is used. So notice, yes, right here we do have it set to normal levels of protection. If we set this to none, this number doesn't change. You can actually type whatever you want to in this cell. So this is something that you can type in manually. If you set it to 0, that's the same as saying it's impossible for a pregnancy to occur. If you set it to 100, then of course it's going to happen every time. And how this works is, now that this is set at 5%, we are going to adjust the likelihood of a pregnancy based on that 5%. So if we're using normal levels of protection, that's going to reduce the likelihood of a pregnancy occurring, as opposed to arcane or alchemical, which would reduce it even further. Underneath that, we have number of participants and encounter length affect conception. So this first checkbox pertains to number of participants, and this second checkbox pertains to encounter length. So the question here is, if you were to be having 6 male participants and 7 female participants, would that increase the likelihood of conception? In my wife's and my brain, we felt like that made sense, that yes, but you can turn that off. So if you want more participants increasing the likelihood of a pregnancy occurring somewhere, then leave this on. If you don't want that to happen, turn that off. And then the same thing with the length of the encounter. If this was a 13-hour encounter, it might be reasonable to assume that an encounter that is that long might increase the likelihood of a pregnancy occurring, so that is true with this checkbox turned on. However, if you don't want the length of the encounter to affect the likelihood of conception, then you can turn that off. Again, all of this is completely moot if you turn pregnancy off. For this next little setting right here, NPC standards, this has to do with what level of performance does our player character need to perform at in order to impress or have a successful encounter with that NPC. You can set it to relaxed, average, rigid, or random. Now rigid would mean really strict. Random means it will select randomly between these three. We are going to see this in action down here in criterion DCs, but basically this is just where you determine the likelihood of your player character impressing the non-player character during that encounter or experience. These 4 cells have to do with the secrecy of the encounter. Does the player character want the encounter to remain covert, meaning hidden, unknown? If they don't care, then it's neutral. If they don't want it to remain hidden, like they want it to be a public proclamation of love or something like that, you would select no. If they want it to be like a secret tryst, you would select yes. This comes into play when we get down here into consequences and events impact on PC's reputation. And then over here as well, does the NPC want the encounter to remain covert? So maybe they both want it to be a secret tryst. You'd click both of those to yes, and that will affect the likelihood of this tryst becoming public. In this case, of course, it would be much less likely because neither one of them are wanting to let other people know about it, but that doesn't reduce the possibility to 0. Then over here, you can set the possibility of STIs. Functions just the same as the pregnancy. If you don't want to bother with STIs, just turn it off. If you want them to be possible, again, you can set the base percentage likelihood of an STI occurring, and then you can determine the level of cleanliness of the NPC that is involved in this encounter. You can set between filthy, average, and hygienic. The idea, of course, being that the more filthy the NPC, the increased likelihood of an STI, or the more hygienic, the decreased likelihood of an STI. So those are all of our settings here for the nice generator. Let's go ahead and generate some results. I'm going to turn pregnancy on just for the sake of showing you the full function of the generator. Same thing with boons and penalties. Let's turn all of those as possible. We are not going to force a balance right now, and click generate. So in this situation, we can look down here in the results, and we have 1 male and 1 female. Our PC is the male, the NPC is a female. They had a 1-hour encounter together. If our PC is wanting to impress their partner, then they would need to roll an athletics check, a sleight of hand check, and a performance check, with the DC of each of them being 10. So this is an opportunity for a copulation experience to become a skill challenge, is what this is. And the DCs of this skill challenge is dependent upon the NPC's standards. So after we finish going through this, I'll come back and I'll show you how you can toy around with these. If we were to increase the standards to rigid, you would watch these DCs go up. and if you decreased the standards to relaxed, you would watch those DCs go down. Now, if you're not a D&D 5e player, DC of course stands for difficulty challenge, and this is the number that your player would have to match on their die roll. If you're not using this generator for D&D 5e, then what you would have to do is you'd have to tweak the numbers manually, which I will show you how to do on the back half of this video. Now we get to look at what the boons and penalties were. So if our PC does meet the criterion for all three of these skills, then what boon might our PC receive, and what penalty might they receive if they don't meet those criteria. Now, if you wanted to be nicer, you could say that your player has to roll 2 out of 3 in order to be successful. That's entirely up to you. But if our player is unsuccessful in meeting the difficulty challenge, then that player will have disadvantage on worst failed criterion for 24 hours. What does that mean? Well, these are the criterion. So which one did your player fail the most on? Like, did your player roll a 2 on one of these? If so, then they're going to have disadvantage on those rolls for the next 24 hours. What sense does that make? I don't know, make it up. Maybe your player's PC hurt themselves somehow. They injured their hand, or something happened to cause them to have less dexterity. Use your imagination. This would be an example of a penalty for a failure. In this particular case, we have no success. Boon. But notice up here, again, force BP balance. If this was set to yes, then we either would have had a boon and a penalty, or we would have had none and none. This is an example of an imbalance. Events impact on PC's reputation is moderate. Now, what does that mean? That's going to be entirely up to you as the GM to determine what would be a moderate impact on this PC's reputation, and would it be good or bad? Now, the way I would play this is if the PC was successful, then it would have a moderately positive effect. If the PC was unsuccessful, then it would have a moderately negative effect on their reputation. And so what does moderate mean in this case? Well, I would play it based upon who the PC is and who the NPC is. If the NPC is the governor's daughter or something, then that's going to be more impactful on the PC's reputation than if it was a tavern wench. Even both of them at moderate, there's going to be a different representation of that. So that's how I would play that. And then over here, I don't know why this little line is right here. If you ever do get this, you can just come up here and click unmerge and merge, and then it goes away, and I don't know why it does that. But here we get our consequences. And so notice it says conception has not occurred, the PC has not contracted an STI, and word of the encounter has not gotten out. But that is the basic functionality of this generator. Let's go ahead and switch things up a little bit. I just want to show you some more diversity that we can get here with our results. Let's increase our number of participants to 4, and we're going to increase the encounter to a 3-hour encounter. Just to show you some more intensive penalties and boons, we're going to do moderate and intense only, and yes, unbalanced. We're going to do no protection and increase the possibility of pregnancy to 50%. We're going to say the NPC's standards are rigid. Your player characters, let's say they're neutral, but the NPCs want it to remain covert, so we're going to click yes to that. We're going to say the NPC's cleanliness is hygienic, and click generate. What do we have here? So, first off, you notice there's a big red warning over here that says a conception has occurred. Now that makes sense, given that we had no protection and a 50% chance. Not to mention the fact that because we had number of participants affecting likelihood of conception, the fact that we had 2 female participants with 2 male participants absolutely increased the likelihood beyond just that 50% mark. Over here we have the criterion. Notice that we're well above the 10s that we saw earlier. That's because our NPC standards are up to rigid at this point. We have an equal boon or penalty. Now notice that they're not identical, but they're equal in level. If we're successful, we have a +1 to con, and that's a permanent boon. This was probably under the intense section, so that can obviously be really intensive, as it's a permanent bonus to the player character. Or on a failure, the PC contracts lycanthropy during the encounter, and obviously that has the potential to be a permanent negative effect, and so that's there as a penalty. Impact of this reputation is mild, no STI, and word has not gotten out. So there's another example. So that shows you just some of the variety that can be achieved through tweaking some of these settings. Again, the purpose of this is just to give you as the GM an opportunity to allow your players some level of consequence with their slightly promiscuous lifestyles inside the game. And that's really it. That's the basic functionality of this generator. I do want to scroll down though and show you that we have a storage system down here. If you look over here on the left, you'll see that there is a little plus button. This is for expanding a hidden section. I've got a couple arrows there pointing at it. You can click that, and you'll notice that we have 3 identically formatted results sections. So if we come up here to the results, we can see that we have, this is what the results looks like. And if we scroll down here, we can see that we have 3 that look just like it. The idea here is if you were to, let's just generate one here, if this was to be the results of a copulation experience that you wanted to save for future reference for your records in regards to your player character's interaction with that particular NPC or so forth, if you wanted to save this information, the catch is that anytime you adjust anything anywhere in this sheet, in this document, then this is going to go away. These results are going to go away. Why? Because these are what are called dynamic cells. Let me show you what that means. I'm going to just click down here. There's nothing in this cell. I'm going to click the delete key. And notice how everything is recycling in there. That's because these are dynamic cells. And that means that changing anything anywhere in the sheet will get rid of your results. And that can be problematic if you want to save those results. And so I gave you a spot down here where you can save those. So what you would do if you wanted to save some results is you would just copy all the results. You would come down to where you wanted to save it. You would just click on the top left corner where it says criterion, and you're going to go right click, paste special, values only. And now that information is down here, and now notice what happens when I click delete. Nothing changes. You can come back over here and you can minimize the section and it's still there. In fact, you have a little tracker right here that tells you that it's still there. It tells you that there are 2 openings. You can expand it back out and it is waiting for you right there. Once you're done with this information, if you want to free up this slot, all you need to do is copy, delete. It tells you that there is an opening again. You can minimize. You've got a space where you can type notes for whatever you want to say about what's in that stack of results. And that allows you the opportunity to save results that will not be recycled or lost due to the dynamic cells. Now, we also have an extra little Easter egg in here. If you look over here in the top right corner, we have this F asterisk and it's pointing up to another expand button. If you click on that, we actually, my wife and I tagged in an extra little generator here, a fetish generator. This is just an opportunity for you to generate some additional details to the NPCs that your player character might be interacting with. So that's there for you as well. And that is it for the basic functionality of the nice generator. This isn't my only generator, by the way. I have dozens that I'm sure you'll find interesting. This table that you see on screen now show all the generators that I have created and which of them at the time of publishing this video have video tutorials like this one. All of my generators will have video tutorials here soon. All of my random generators are available on buymeacoffee.com for just a couple bucks. Links are in the description. If you're enjoying this video, now would be a great time to share it with other gamers. Please hit the like button and subscribe, it really helps me out. It's customization that sets my random generators apart from all the others. If you're a widely experienced GM, this probably isn't your first random generator that you've toyed around with, but it will probably be your last. No other tool has allowed you to customize the code and the master lists so that you can personally craft your own spectrum of results, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do now. If you look down in the bottom left corner, you'll see that there is a reference tab. All of my generators have a reference tab, and the reference tab takes us to the back half that I was mentioning earlier, where we get to look at the guts of this machine, what makes it all function. And here is where you are going to tweak various settings to fine-tune this generator and the experience that you want your players to have at the table. You'll notice we currently have 6 sections that are collapsed, and we'll get to those in just a second. Let's take a look at columns A and B really quick. Simply put, columns A and B are nothing you need to worry about. They're just there for the functionality of the generator, and unless you know how to code Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel type stuff, I would just completely ignore those and don't worry about them. Let's go ahead and expand open column C here under skill checks. Remember how over here in the results, we had our list of criterion and we had 3 different skills that were generated with their various DCs. Where does that come from? That comes from columns D, E, and F right here. So here is a list of all of the skill checks in D&D 5e with their respective checkboxes. Any skill check that has its box checked is available to be generated over here in the results. If you look at this list and you feel like you want to include Arcana in the mix, maybe your player character is a magic user and you want to allow that as an opportunity, you can just turn that on, and then over here in the results, it's possible for Arcana to be one of the criterion that your player would have to roll against. Ignore these two tables over here. I'm going to turn them gray for you to make that more clear. Ignore these gray boxes over here. Those are just part of the function of the cell, and you're not going to adjust them at all. Scrolling down a little bit, here is where we determine the DC for the various skill checks. Whichever skill checks are generated over there, this is where we're going to determine the minimum and maximum based upon whether it is relaxed, average, or rigid. Remember back over here, when we looked at NPC standards, we had relaxed, average, and rigid. This right here is what we call a min-max table. So in the min stands for minimum, max stands for maximum. And so when the NPC standards are set to relaxed, what is the minimum DC and what is the maximum DC that might be generated for that relaxed NPC's criterion? Same thing with average, same thing with rigid. You can change these numbers. If you wanted the minimum to be 6 and the maximum to be 12, then you can do that. And now whenever the NPC is set to relaxed, the DCs will only result between 6 and 12. So you can change those numbers. Just make sure though that whatever your minimums are equal to or less than the maximums. If the minimums are higher than the maximums, then it will break the generator. So that's it for the skill check. Let's take a look at the next section, which is fame and spread. Notice back over here in the results that we have events impact on NPC reputation. In this case is moderate. Where does the word moderate come from? It comes from this table right here, and there's moderate right there. This is the odds table where you can determine the likelihood of the encounter's impact on the NPC's fame. So we have 5 different impacts that might occur. No impact whatsoever, mild, moderate, significant, or severe impacts, and their respective percentage likelihoods to occur. So notice that there is a 75% chance that your PC's interaction will either have a mild or a moderate effect on the PC's reputation. You get to change these numbers however you want to. However, do make sure that they always add up to 100%. Notice right here in this white box, it has 100%. So if you wanted to increase the likelihood of a severe effect to 15%, notice that we've gone above the 100%, so we're going to have to remove 10% somewhere else. There we are, back to the 100. So you can change these numbers, just make sure that they all add up to 100% when you're done. So this table is how you affect the likelihood of the impact for your player. Beneath that, where it says spread and points it down here, this is all going to affect the likelihood and the severity of this encounter and the fact that this encounter occurred being spread out into the community around wherever it happened. So there's a 5% base level chance that it will be spread. Now, in order for this to make sense, so here's a result where it says word of the encounter will get out in 1 day. The number 1 here can fluctuate, and that's why it puts days in plural. So if word of it does get out, then it will respond that, or it will show that here in these results. So if we come back over here, there is a 5% likelihood of word being spread, just for starters. But we're going to modify this 5% chance through various other settings, such as right here, the desire for the covert relationship. If the PC wants the encounter to be covert, then it's going to reduce the likelihood of word being spread by 50%. So we've got 5% here, and we're going to reduce it by an additional 50%. So in other words, our resulting percentage likelihood would be 2.5%, because we have 5% base, and then 50% of 5% is 2.5%. And if the NPC also wants the event to be covert, then that will reduce it by an additional 50%, making it extremely unlikely that word of this encounter will get out publicly. However, notice what happens if neither one of them care, or they don't want it to remain a secret, then that's going to significantly increase the likelihood. And then if they are neutral either way, then it just does 100%, which means it's going to keep it at the 5% modifier. So you can change these percentages. You're welcome to play around with these however you want to. There's no min-max here or anything. Anything under 100% will decrease the likelihood of the knowledge or information being spread. Anything above 100% will increase the likelihood. This little table impacts the likelihood of the event being spread about based upon the number of participants. So for every NPC or PC that participated in the encounter, the percentage likelihood of the event being spread about goes up by 2%. So you can change that percentage as well. And then this is the min-max table for how quickly will the event be spread. Notice in our results over here it says it'll be spread in 1 day. So the generator is going to pick randomly between hours, days, weeks, and months, and then it will randomly generate a number between the minimum and its respective maximum. You can affect the minimums and the maximums here, as I've shown you before. And this is the odds table for the percentage likelihood of it being spread in hours, days, weeks, or months, as I just showed you up here. And you can change these percentages, making sure that they all equal 100% when you're done. You can ignore this little gray box down here, that's just functionality. So that's it for this section on how you can tweak the fame and the spread from the interaction. Let's open up boons and penalties. We have two different sections here. We have success and we have failures, but they both function pretty much the same. So right here we have success boon quality odds. Now remember, if we come back over here to the generator, we had boons and penalties custom. Remember, I told you that if this was set to random, it would only play off of the checkboxes, but if you set it to custom, then the checkboxes won't matter and it will pull from an odds table or a series of percentage likelihoods of occurrence. And that's what this table is right here. So when this is set to custom, then there's a 50% chance of no success boon, a 35% chance of a mild success boon, 10%, and 5%. So you can change those percentages as I've shown you before. Ignore these three cells here in the middle. And then underneath here is what we call an infinite list table, where we list what mild, moderate, and intense boons might be generated. These are called infinite lists because you can add whatever you want to down in these cells forever. You can have tens of thousands if you really wanted to. And I just added this one, whatever you want to. I just added this in here. And now that this is in this list, whenever the generator produces a mild boon here, it is possible that whatever you want to might be generated in this list. These three columns are how you are going to tweak or curate what types of boons your PCs might have access to from a successful encounter. Let me show you how to tweak infinite lists. So adding things in is really easy. You just put them in underneath into the blank cells, and that's awesome. Removing things from lists that you don't want, like if you're looking over here and you're looking at any of these and you don't want any of them to exist in the list, you don't want them to be possible, how do you remove them? Well, if it's at the bottom of a list, you can just delete it, and that's no problem. However, what if it's in the middle of a list? So for example, this one, +1 to the highest passed criterion, permanent. If you don't want this one in the list, if you just delete that, that's problematic, because now we have a blank cell in the middle of a list, and that can break the generator. So much better than just pressing delete is selecting the one that you want to remove. You're going to right click, delete cells, and shift up. Now what that has done is that has removed that item from the list without leaving a blank. So with that understanding in mind, this is how you can add or remove to these infinite lists for the mild, moderate, and intense boons. And if we scroll to the right a little bit, we have the exact same setup for the failure penalties. You have the odds table, you have mild, moderate, and intense results. You can add or remove to those lists however you want the generator to function. So that's it for that section, pretty simple. Moving on to pregnancy and protection. So you've got a couple black triangles in there you might want to take a look at before you toy around with this. But simply put, pretty much leave none at 100%. That doesn't mean there's a 100% likelihood of pregnancy. That's your one modifier. Like if you know mathematics, right? Multiplying anything by 1 leaves it the exact same. That's what this is here. If normal protection is used, then it reduces the likelihood of conception by 90%. We went from 100% down to 10%. If alchemical protection was used, we went from 100% down to 5%, so there's a 95% reduction of chance. And arcane protection down to a 1% chance. So you can tweak these three numbers if you feel like normal shouldn't be that effective or should be more effective. If you feel like arcane protection should always be successful in preventing a pregnancy, then you just click that to 0. So you can change those percentages to reflect how you want the odds to work in your world. So this number is where we determine the likelihood of conception based upon multiple participants beyond 2. Basically, if you want more participants to increase the likelihood of conception more so, then you're going to want to go above 1.0. If you want it to have less of an impact, you're going to drop it below 1.0. Same thing with length of encounter, conception multiplier, and then apply that multiplier for every 60 minutes of the encounter. You can change this. If you wanted it to be for every 2 hours, then you would type in 120. basically just giving you control for the likelihood of conception based upon how much time these player characters and NPCs spend together. So that's it for that section. You can reduce that. This next one is STIs. Here again, we have the percentage likelihood of an STI based upon the cleanliness of the NPCs. You can change those percentages. And here is the odds table for the severity of the STI that your player might get. So notice over here in the results, in this particular one, the PC has contracted a moderate STI. We have mild, moderate, and severe. So there was a 25% chance once the generator determined that they would get an STI, there was a 25% chance that it would be a moderate one. You can change these percentages as I've shown you. And that's it for that. And the last section here is the fetish generator. And we can determine the fervor level for that particular fetish. Casual, keen, or obsessed. Odds table, you can change those. The fetish intensity, common, abnormal, or deviant. You can change the odds there. And then we have common, abnormal, or deviant fetishes. And there's an infinite list here that you can tweak however you want to. So that's all that for you, and that is how you customize this generator. Thank you very much for watching. Remember, I have dozens of other generators, so be sure to check them out here on YouTube or at buymeacoffee.com. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and happy gaming.